Shovel Knight is a game where you play as a knight who runs around hitting local representatives with a shovel in a magical platforming journey to rescue your long-lost traveling partner and free the land from the clutches of the evil enchantress. In other words, this game has everything, and when I first picked it up, I didn't put it down until I'd beaten it. Sometimes it's hard to talk about games like the original Shovel Knight because, looking back on it, it's not as focused on being the most unique thing possible. It's a game whose design is more focused on getting as many things right as possible than trying to rise above the rest of the genre with something extremely unique or new. This game has beautiful art, extremely fun and polished platforming, a lovingly crafted musical score, goofy enemies, smart dialogue, varied and surprising bosses, and a storyline that is competent, something that is a 1 in 100 occurrence in the video game industry. Now, Shovel Knight is incredible, but if you ask me, I would give it an 8.5 out of 10 when compared to the other Shovel Knight games.
Mega Man, those are good. Gotta show respect for Mega Man. But really, the best Mega Man game is Shovel Knight. Let's be real here. Shovel Knight kind of fucking slam dunk Mega Man into the ground.
About a year after the release of Shovel Knight, they released a free DLC for the game that added an entire alternate campaign where you got to play as one of the game's villains, the malicious and scheming Plague Knight, in his dark and treacherous quest to impress the girl he has a crush on. It's genius! Genius, I say! One would think that a plotline as silly and sweet as Plague Knight's would be a slap in the face to Shovel Knight's legacy, but the game is like this. The storyline skyrockets when it hits Plague Knight. It's just so sweet and awkward and epic and clever and funny and heartbreaking. I'm already kind of worried that I've given too much away, but I'll try to leave it at this. Shovel Knight Plague of Shadows is probably my favorite romance story. While still having the same general skeleton and room layout as Shovel Knight, the thing that really diversifies Plague Knight mechanically is his movement and mobility. In Shovel Knight, the level design is very interactive to debut his pogo hop ability. Now, what's cool about Plague Knight is that this guy is so crazy that when plopped in the same situation, you can just go, "Hee!" and launch yourself across the realm because he doesn't give a darn. Though it could be argued that Plague Knight's campaign is essentially the same thing as Shovel Knight's, the game just feels like such a step up from the original, where the wacky energy of Shovel Knight's background characters can really take center stage and create something that really does feel original and unique while remaining incredible. I give Plague Knight a 9 out of 10 and a dried noob finger. Now that Shovel Knight had created a great game and immediately blown it out of the water, they could have stopped there and said, alright, that's good enough. But they were just getting started. The next story that they decided to tell, well, is the
tragic story of how Tony Hawk Pro Skater became the Grim Reaper.
I feel like so much of the aesthetic that I find myself drifting towards in video games was so inspired by Specter Knight. This shiz is just so cool, I adore it. While Plague Knight has a special place in my heart, this is a game that has stuck with me for a story that is dark, grim, a little self-aware of its edginess, defiant and loving. I've beaten all of these games countless times and I still get chills every time I get to the ending of Specter Knight. You think that in a prequel where your mission is to subdue the world that these games have made you love, you'd come to loathe the character you play as. But even though he's moody and grim and does horrible things, you find yourself itching for his success regardless of the costs and sacrifices or the selfishness of his own goals. The reworked soundtrack and visual styles that are overlaid on top of the stages you've come to know by heart really sell the feeling that you're at a different point in the world's history. And plot aside, every track that they reworked is an epic and intricate improvement to the original score. While Plague Knight's mobility strayed away from the limitations of the stage, more so than ever before is Specter Knight intertwined with the level geometry. Specter Knight wall climbs, wall jumps, air dashes to lanterns, and skates on his Grim Reaper scythe somehow, because like Plague Knight, he just doesn't give a darn. All of these platforming decisions really convey the feeling that you're playing as a nimble and lethal assassin, striking from the shadows and lunging from foe to foe. Specter Knight's campaign is just so cool, so fun, and so fresh. Even though it could be considered a little bit campy in its Grim Reaper edginess, I feel like it scratches the perfect ominous and brooding itch without getting too depressing. This game is one of my favorite things, and it earns itself a big 9.5 out of 10. And now for the stupid and depressing part of the video. After Yacht Club Games completed Specter of Torment, I waited 2 years for them to release the announced King of Cards campaign. By that point, I knew the first 3 games by heart, had gotten all of their achievements, and having fully completed everything the games had to offer, let Shovel Knight slip out of my mind as I moved on to other incredible games. When King Knight's campaign was finally, after all this time, released, it felt like opening a treasure chest that had been gathering cobwebs in my dungeon. But what I discovered was the most disappointing of these incredible and lovingly crafted games. Now, as far as video games go, King Knight is a great game, but as far as Shovel Knight games go, it kind of just sucks. Let's look at King Knight's mobility. What is this? Is he like a football player ballerina? I can appreciate that they were really trying to branch out with every character's movement to make each game feel different while remaining true to the original bosses, but never once was I like, wow, it's so awesome that I'm spinning around like a doofus Wile E. Coyote right now. The levels that they made to accommodate this were kind of cool, but it just didn't feel worth having that be his bread and butter mechanic. Maybe that seems like a minute thing to pick at, but in a game like this, character mobility is baked into every obstacle and encounter, and I have to mentally grapple with this every other second of the game. As far as the storyline, I was hoping that it would offer some degree of redemption to this pompous and sickening villain, as it did for the 2 previous games, but it only made me hate him more.
He's like wearing this beautiful set of armor, right? It's like, wow, that's like really amazing, but like when you get to know him, it's like, oh, there's not much there, it's sort of hollow.
The ending of King Knight, and I'm being a little loose with spoilers because I don't care as much, is that he betrays everyone who fought for him and fails to learn or grow, remaining only capable of loving himself. In fact, my favorite part about King Knight's story is when it ends, and it ties it all back to the beginning. And instead of gaining a new appreciation for this villain, you gain a new appreciation for the hero who started it all. King of Cards definitely wasn't my thing, but I have to admit that there are good things about it. Ultimately, it wasn't bad enough to ruin the other games for me, or keep me from considering the Shovel Knight saga as one of the decade's best video game franchises. Especially Plague of Shadows and Specter of Torment have stuck with me and shaped my imagination from when I was first exposed to them in early high school. These games are all lovingly crafted and all incredible. But if we're being honest, the only good Shovel Knight game is Shovel Knight Showdown! Woo! Give me some of that! Let's go Shovel Knight Showdown forever! Woo!